We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AVRant. My name is Rob H., and this week I am here with...
Lee Overstreet, pinch hitting for Tom, who I believe is having part of his face removed.
Joe Klusnick.
Yeah, that's right. Joe Klusnick is also here. Surprise audio-only listeners. We've got a three-person podcast going. It's gonna be chaos, partly because there's the three of us here. We haven't had this group of three people together before, using different recording software, although thankfully, thanks to our Trinnov interview, I've used it once before, but we'll see how the heck that goes. And beyond that, everybody decided to announce their news this week. We knew it was going to be CEDIA. Joe is here to regale us with his tales of what took place at CEDIA because he visited in person, and we're going to be doing that at the end of the podcast, and who knows how long this episode is going to be, because, oh my goodness, do we have a lot to get to. But, like, outside of CEDIA, there was, like, crazy amounts of news, too. So I'll just give you a heads up, everybody, right now. We're not going to talk about the PS5 Pro. I know that got announced this week. Don't have time. Didn't have time to do a write-up about it. Just happened today. I don't have time for that. Arundel did a whole interview with Audioholics. Outdoor Speaker Depot. Tom and I will talk about stuff they announced at CEDIA next week. I don't know if Joe visited. Did you visit Outdoor Speaker Depot at CEDIA, Joe? Hello? Have we lost Joe already? What's going on?
I did.
He does
saw them
look
there at the
very
show.
frozen up.
Okay. So I guess we could talk about that, but I didn't put it on the list, so that'll be on the fly if it happens. DTS had like a clear dialogue thing. I don't know if we'll talk about that. The stupid Meta is like, yeah, let's get on the action. We'll talk about a new Quest headset. Just nuts. Hisense has an
Announcement
OLED.
week.
Emotiva had new stuff. We'll talk about a lot of these things in future weeks, but we have so much other things. So if any of those things were important to you, we'll get to them eventually, but probably not this week. Maybe the Outdoor Speaker Depot stuff, although I don't have any images prepared for all of that. But yeah, on top of all that, we have to say a little bit of sad news. We don't talk about celebrity deaths and stuff like that on this podcast because that would be something every week, but James Earl Jones passed away. I mean, they cannot go unmentioned. Mr. James Earl Jones, 93 years old, lived to a nice ripe old age there. But that's some sad news. We're very, very sorry that remarkable voice and remarkable actor has passed away. But what a remarkable life.
There is a lot of crossover between home theater enthusiasts and Star Wars fans.
Come there on. Ever?
Come on.
Yeah, so rest in peace, James Earl Jones, but a fantastic legacy, fantastic actor and voice actor. So well, he'll be sorely missed, but we have so many things that we can enjoy from his amazing career. So on that little bit of a sad note, but completely changing gears, we're still going to do our regular segments here, but we're not going to belabor anything because, oh my goodness, do we have a ton to get through this week. But we are going to start with a little bit of catching up. Lee, we haven't talked to you in a long time. What's been going on in your life? And then after that, what have you been watching? Because that is the normal segment we're going to roll this into.
I can't remember when was the last time I was on with you, Rob. Did I tell you about trying to cut my finger off?
I don't know if that was on the podcast or if
so
that was
that's happened since.
I
had a little hedge trimmer accident been a couple months ago and nearly lost the tip of this left index finger.
Right.
So
I did see all of that going on social media, but I don't remember that being on AVRant. Yeah.
That's been like the biggest thing in life. And this is also a really stressful week because my wife, Heather's been sick and she's doing better now. And that's been stressful. And then I'm a politics nut because I was a political science major and a law student. So I'm not watching a certain debate right now.
That's how much I care about this. From live coverage of the debate. That's how dedicated we are around here.
That's how much I care about this podcast. Right. And then my mom has a surgery coming up in a few days and I got to get her there at 7:00 in the morning. And there's just a lot going on. So yeah, that's what's been happening with me. I mean, overall, can't complain. Honestly.
Okay. That's good. Doing all right.
Overall, nothing traumatic, really.
So what have you been watching?
What have I been watching? Well, I was going to tell you about how we do this thing where Heather will link to things, put it on our, whatever you call it on Netflix when you put something on your want to watch list.
Sure, yeah.
Right. So on the want to watch list, she'll put things for me. and she knows I like spacey sci-fi stuff and post-apocalyptic looking things, anything like that. She'll add it, and I go through and sometimes I watch it. And so I watched, because of that, I watched a movie called Life.
Yeah.
From 2017.
Jake Gyllenhaal, was he the one starring in that?
I don't know anybody's name.
It rings a bell. I think that
I don't know anybody's name. Okay. What's the actor's name? I don't know. He's very sarcastic, and I just know every time I see this particular actor, he's the same character.
Okay.
He's the same attitude, and he was in this film too.
Ryan Reynolds.
Life is a sci-fi show for people that don't know anything about the sci part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very bad. And there's just 100 million tropes of all sci-fi in there. The space station doesn't look like that. Orbits don't work like that. You wouldn't do that with a life form you thought you found on another planet. Everything's wrong. Everything's bad and wrong.
But how was the home theater experience side of it?
It was pretty good. It's pretty good. Nothing really. They tried to do a lot of jump scare kabumps, to make me jump. And there was some good rumbly bumblies and stuff. But honestly, I was just so distracted by how dumb it was. But the weirdest thing is, the dumber the science gets on a sci-fi, sometimes the more I want to watch it just to see, what are they going to do here?
Fair enough. Yeah.
Right? So I can't really recommend it if you like the sci part of sci-fi, but if you like things go boom and monsters come at you and things jump, maybe you like that one. And then also she had a series on there that turns out it was on broadcast television. I think like the CW
It was on the CW.
Network.
Yep.
Yeah. It's called The 100. And like for the first episode, I'm like, oh, interesting concept. And then just like Life, it started getting dumber and dumber. I mean, like, so dumb.
I mean, I'm assuming you didn't get through the entire series. Though.
God, no. Yeah. I kept going for a while.
Okay.
Because, again, I'm like, what stupid thing's going to happen next? And more crazy groups of humans on Earth keep getting introduced. And I'm like, this is clearly for teenagers, number one.
Yes, it is that.
Yeah, this is for teenagers. And it doesn't have any science, and there's a million tropes in it too. So I've watched a lot of bad sci-fi since last we've talked. But
I'll say I liked The 100. I thought it did get better in later seasons. They introduced
Did it? Well, maybe I'll keep looking.
They introduced a couple of really, really strong actors who weren't in the original cast, and they definitely elevated the series. But I think that was about season 5 out of 7, so you'd have to stick with it for a while.
I don't know if I can get that far. Like, it was so hard to watch that first season where science and orbits didn't matter.
Sure.
That's not how space works. That's not how any of this works. So that if you can get past all that and everybody's on Earth, I guess maybe it gets better. The one thing that was a bright spot was I watched a football game, American football game, college football on Peacock, and it looked fantastic.
Okay.
Asterisk. It looked fantastic, but it couldn't hold the bit rate. And lately, I don't know if it's my TV. I've seen some problems holding a bit rate on HBO Max and a couple of not too much on Netflix and almost never on YouTube TV. So I can't decide, is the TV doing it or apps doing it? Because apps on that particular LG OLED have had fits before and they got updated and they got better. And I've seen people in forums complaining about the apps for this service and that service not being good. So I'm just starting to wonder though, because Wi-Fi radios die, they do.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what's going on with that TV, but
so
that
you're
Peacock
using the
broadcast,
TV's built-in apps. You're not using any separate streamer there.
Yeah. I really like it all built in. I mean, you can't deny the convenience.
Yes.
It's very easy.
So, I mean, you
cool.
are talking about an LG OLED from, 5-6 years ago at this point, right?
It's the 2018 model. We bought it in early 19.
Had a C8?
A B, right?
B8, okay. So, I mean, LG, they don't update their WebOS thing. Like, you don't get the latest version as it goes along.
2 days ago, I got a new WebOS version.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just like 2 days ago.
Okay. But, I think it might be more down to just the built-in app situation and maybe not being right up to date more so than it is like the Wi-Fi hardware. That would be my guess.
I agree. That's where I'm leaning.
Yeah.
I don't think it's physically dying, but I think it's a case of where like an older computer starts to seem slower because the software going onto it gets bulkier.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
So
I have a feeling that adding a streaming device and doing things through that would probably improve things. However, I mean, you do have the option of just plugging an Ethernet cable in. So
I think I will do that, but that requires getting under the house.
Oh, okay.
Because the cable that goes from where the router is in a closet in the center of the house to the living room got damaged years ago. Somehow it just stopped working. So I can use it as a pull, and I can pull it through. So I need to do that, but kind of a pain in the butt. And I really wish it
so
worked.
either way, either some sweat equity or some money spent to add a streaming device. But yeah, I think that's probably solvable in one way or another.
You know how cheap I am. I'll go with the sweat equity first. But let me just say that the Peacock broadcast of that college football game, I couldn't tell if it was 4K or not. I was staring at it like, that looks so good. It looks so good, so much detail, so much better than like trash ESPN 720p. ESPN sucks so hard. The bit rate on all the ESPN channels on YouTube TV and on others is just low, and it's got too much information at the bottom of the screen on ESPN. So you're getting about 600 lines of resolution vertically when you watch a game. It just looks terrible. So all of a sudden you get a stream that looks like 4K. I think it was 4K, but not HDR. Whereas I think when I watched Thursday night football NFL on Amazon Prime, I think that might have been 1080p, but HDR.
But with HDR, right.
I don't know, because none of them will label it. It doesn't have like, I keep looking for like an info button, or like on YouTube itself, there's a stats for nerds setting.
You know, the criticism of if it isn't readily apparent to your eyeballs without a label, then is it really worth paying for the upgrade for people who are like more price conscious? You know what I mean? That's a pretty reasonable question. If you're like, I need a label in order for me to be sure. So.
Well, I do know that really high bitrate 1080p HDR looks amazing.
Yeah.
And 4K on Netflix looks amazing.
Yep.
And it's so rare to get a chance to see a football game, any kind of sporting event in 4K, that it just blew me away. So it is definitely better than whatever it is ESPN is doing.
Yes, fair enough.
So it's so much better. That might spur me to pay the extra like $10 a month, I think it is.
That's
for
what they want.
YouTube TV to get 4K. It just depends on how many games there are. We'll see. Anyway, but that's me. And
okay. So,
I know we haven't talked to each other in a while, but I don't want to take up too much time on a show that's got a long list of things.
That is definitely the case. If you're looking at the YouTube video, you'll notice that Joe Klusnick has dropped off this call. He will be back. He was just having some internet connection issues there, so doing a quick computer reset. So I will go ahead and jump in with what I watched this week. Until Joe is back with us, I watched the movie Maxxxine with 3 X's in the middle there for the name. This is the third. I know. This is the third in Ty West's trilogy of Maxxxine / Pearl, his sort of homage horror movies that he made, starting with just X. It was just the movie called X, and then within months, the surprise prequel to X, which was Pearl, and now a couple years later, Maxxxine, the end of this trilogy. So this is a very interesting horror trilogy of movies because each movie is very, very distinct. This isn't like trying to do the regular horror movie, we're just going to remake the first movie a gazillion times with little twists on it. Each movie is very, very distinct, completely different styles, and completely different settings, different time settings. So this is the 80s, and this is a very, very 80s movies. Now, Ty West is about the same age as me. I think he was born in 1980 or 1981. Which means that, in the 80s, he was a child. So the version of the 80s that we see in Maxxxine, this is Los Angeles, this is Hollywood, and it's the movie version of 80s Los Angeles that as a movie maker, Ty West remembers from 80s movies more than it is a real depiction of
lots of convertibles and neon colors and lots of cocaine everywhere.
Lots of cocaine. The color scheme is like very 80s movie color scheme. So that's the aesthetic that you go for. I mean, no problem with that. You make a choice and he sticks to it and pulls it off really well. For me personally, what I've really liked about this whole trilogy of movies is that as much as they are horror movies, and each of them is a different kind of horror movie, even though it's similar characters shared across them, they've been deeper than just straight up horror movies. They've really been when I reviewed X and when I reviewed Pearl, I'm like, they're really sad in the background. It's a sadness that is pervasive throughout these movies, and then with some gore and with killings and stuff that's going on, but it has all this underlying sadness that's going on, and it is just this constant can't get away from it, chasing fame. That's what's driving the main characters in these movies. They are so desperate to be famous that they will do anything.
That's a phenomenon nowadays on
Yes.
social media, isn't it? So
that's why it absolutely works. So for me personally, I mean, I've only watched Maxxxine once, but I mean, Pearl stands out as my personal favorite by leaps and bounds. I absolutely adore Pearl. I think it's so fantastic. And yet, I've seen other people reviewing it, and that's their least favorite out of the trilogy. So because each of them is such a distinct style, there's something for each person. I've grown to like X more. I've seen it a couple times since I first saw it, and I've grown to like it more. I always liked it, but I like it even more now. Maxxxine, I think, is my, I will say, least favorite out of the three, just on first blush, just on first watch, first opinion. I think it's my least favorite of the three, but it's another one where I'm like, I'm pretty sure if I watch it again, I'll find more that I like to it. But this is going, it's not really much of a horror movie. It's much more of a mystery. It's a whodunit, and it's sort of, it's like that 80s style. Everybody's doing drugs and chasing fame and chasing girls, and like it's that style through.
Was there a scene in a strip club? Because that's every other 80s movie.
There absolutely are several scenes in strip clubs. Yes, yeah, no, it's all the tropes. So I mean, if you hate trope type movies, but I mean, it's so intentional. It's not there's no mistake that was being made here.
Exactly. If you're not falling back on it because you can't think of anything else, if you're doing it on purpose,
no.
I don't hate it. Like that actually sounds a little intriguing, and I don't really like horror movies.
Then of
straight
course,
horror movies.
Yeah, it's within the trilogy, and there are horror moments in it for sure. But I would struggle to actually classify this as horror straight up. It's much more thriller and mystery. But Mia Goth, she is the star in all three of this trilogy. She is so darn good that, I mean, that's why I say it's the least favorite of mine out of the three, but I mean, it's still good, and she's so amazing just as an actor that it's never going to go into I didn't enjoy this. And then Kevin Bacon is in this movie having an absolute blast as this private investigator who's chasing her down. And
if you're watching a movie set in the 80s and Kevin Bacon's in it, right, even though he's older now, it's still like,
and I mean, of course there's some tongue-in-cheek because they go through this whole thing of famous actors who got their start in horror, one of whom would be Kevin Bacon. I mean, it's not as though he's playing Kevin Bacon in this movie. He's playing a very distinct character. But yeah, so lots to like in this movie. But on first blush, I mean, nothing's going to touch Pearl for me. But yeah, that was something I can definitely recommend. It's not like a home theater, big old demo movie per se. But yeah, some of the photography, it's got that 80s style to it. So it's going to look a little dingier. It's going to look a little darker. It's going to have some crushed blacks, because that, again, is all intentional to go with the style.
And I always picture, sort of the Panavision widescreen and long lenses close-ups of people from their forehead to their chin. There's lots of that in 80s movies, especially like late 80s.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there was a ton of that in this. It's more the aesthetic in that. But and yeah, quite a bit spent on sort of a movie theater or a movie studio back lot, and playing with all of that as well. So yeah, lots to enjoy there. So I'm gonna crack on here just because we don't have time. I don't know if we'll get back to what Joe watched at some point, but somehow he hasn't rejoined us yet, which is a little too bad. So
hope everything's okay where he's at.
Yeah.
Where in the world is Joe? I don't even know.
We need him very much for the end of this podcast to tell us what happened.
It's going to be a shorter podcast if he doesn't show back up.
It's going to be wild if we're missing Joe for the end of this podcast, but we can go through news and questions in his absence if absolutely necessary.
A lot of news and questions. Yeah.
We'll see what happens here, but I will get into the regular part of this podcast by letting you all know this is AVRant. It is your home theater and AV questions answered. And if you would like your questions answered, all you have to do is ask us. You ask by emailing your questions to question avrant.com. That is our email address. It is by far the best way to reach us, and we just do first in, first out, so it's a very easy organizational system. But question@avrant is the place to contact us. We are also available, you can come to our website, which is, of course, avrant.com, to see our show notes. Those Flickr albums posted there as well, so you can see the images that we're talking about as we go through here. If you want to see the images as we're talking about them, you can go to youtube.com/avrant. You can see our video version there and look at our lovely faces most of the time, because there's just so much beauty going on there. Maybe we should put an 80s filter over it. That might help things.
I even shaved for this podcast.
That's
Look
right.
at that. I'm clean shaven.
And we do also have social media ways to get in touch with us. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast. We have our individual email addresses. I'm Rob@avrant.com. Tom Andrew, the normal host of this podcast, away this week. He is Tom@avrant.com. And Lee has an email address too. Lee
I do.
@avrant.com. You'd never guess it. It's
I
just
know.
so amazing.
I'm proud of Lee@avrant.com. That
As you
took
should
like
be.
a decade to get. And so I'm really proud of it. So, if you want to say hi to me via that email, it comes to like my regular personal email, but it's
There you go. Yeah,
like
he gets forwarded. We're around on different social medias. I'm at First Reflect. If you're on a certain social media place, if you search for that handle, if I'm on that platform, then that's what I'll be. I'll be at First Reflect. And Lee, what do you go by these days? What's the place to reach you?
Used to be, I would tell you that you can find me on Twitter at Lee Overtweet.
Mm-hmm. For
like
the
that.
puns.
But I haven't looked at that in ages because I realized I made too many accounts on too many social media
Right.
platforms. And so I and I got the most fun out of at Tesla Lusa,
There it is.
because back in 2021, when we got the Tesla, it was all fun and, went on Twitter and I'm like, I'm from Tuscaloosa with a Tesla, so I'm Tesla Lusa. And I ended up with a good many followers, couple thousand. And so as it got worse and became X, I was hesitant to get rid of it.
Yeah.
So I'm still looking at it often.
Yeah.
So you could find me at Tesla Lusa,
Okay.
Loosa on X, or what happened, I also made an Instagram for the same account,
Sure.
and then Threads happened.
That's right.
So then I moved on to Threads, and so on Threads, I'm also at Tesla Lusa. But
Yeah.
the funny thing is, on X, I'm like a lefty liberal socialist commie, and on Threads, I'm a fascist. So-
Sure.
because
sense.
I've got Tesla in my name on Threads. So social media is weird for me now, and I
Yep.
need to just start over and find some new account names, because I created this weird controversial situation
Right.
that I don't know what to do with it.
So this is good timing. Joe is back. You should be anyway. We'll see if this works. Are you back with us, Joe? Have we regained Joe
I see Joe.
joining us? I see him. I don't know. He's not responding. I don't know.
Can you hear me now?
Well, there he
Yes.
is. We've got you.
Okay,
Good
can
timing,
you
because
hear me?
we've wrapped up the basic intro and what we watched. But if you want to quickly regale us
I
with what
swear
you
I'm
watched this
talking.
week, Joe, we haven't gone too far past that section. I can hear you, but
I
I
can
think
hear
we still
you.
got a whole bunch of lag. I don't know what's going on. Why so bad?
Yeah,
Street?
Sorry,
Strange
guys.
delay, but we
Connection
can
is
hear
just
you.
laggy tonight.
That's
We'll
not-
pretend Joe is in orbit around the Earth, and the bit rate is just low. That's just how
Why
it
is this working so poorly? Well, you know what? I think we'll just have to move on with things while we try to get that sorted out of the background somehow. That's too bad. We mainly need Joe for the end of the podcast, so hopefully we'll have it all sorted out by then. That is the most critical of all. So I'll go on for now and say listeners of the week here. Listeners of the week are people who support this podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is by coming to our website, avrant.com. On the desktop version over on the right-hand side, you can click on the picture of a cup of coffee. That'll take you to PayPal, where you can make a PayPal donation if you please. I don't know if anybody gave us a PayPal donation this week, because Tom's the only one who sees that, so I don't have access to those names right now, but if anybody did, we'll thank you next week, and if you'd like to, for next week or the future, that's the way you can do it, avrant.com, and do a PayPal donation. We also take donations via Patreon, so that is patreon.com/avrantpodcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation, and we have 134 patrons over there there right now. That number ticked up yet again, so that's very nice to see. So thank you all very much for your financial support. Also want to say, if you can't support us financially, that's 100% fine. Do anything you like and let us know about it. We'll thank you here in this Listeners of the Week section. One thing that people can do to help, Tom Andry, he is the editor-in-chief of the website avgadgets.com. And whenever possible, he likes to use real-life photos from, people who send in photos, but you have to give permission so that he's not going to get sued by somebody for trademark infringement or something like that. So anybody who says, yes, I give Tom permission to use my photos on avgadgets.com, we like to see that, and we like to thank them. So Mario and our very own Joe Klusnick said that we're allowed to use those photos on AV Gadgets if we want to. So thank you, Mario, and thank you, Joe. And then we also want to give a mention to people who just send in notes of gratitude for keeping this podcast going through whatever it is. A deluge of home theater news this week is what it is that we're dealing with, plus horrible internet problems on this rather important
It's just a crazy delay. I think we can hear Joe, and when it comes time for him to say anything, we can hear him. He can talk, but we can't interact with him because there's about a 20-second delay.
That apparently is the problem. I don't know how to fix that on this, other than maybe at some point we'll shut it all down and restart it, and we'll just have to do an awkward edit. But I'll just say those notes of gratitude this week came from Stan, Dazz, and Mario, and thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude, and for everybody who continues to send in your questions, and for everybody who continues to listen. It's all very nice, and we thank you very much. So
shall we bump up into like 300 news stories?
Yeah. So this is non-CEDIA news, if you can believe it, and we still have a whole bunch of stories. So let's try like one or two, and then I think maybe we'll end this and do a splice and try a new recording to see if we can get Joe in here, because it would be horrible to not have Joe's input for longer than this first or second news story.
That's true. He keeps freezing up with interesting facial expressions. At least that part of it is fun. All right. So real quickly, there's a bunch of Apple stuff. Since barely everything had to be announced within this past week, Apple had their iPhone 16 event, and we aren't the podcast to cover all that news, so we'll leave it to you to find a much better source than us for all the Apple details. But as a very, very quick summary, here's a little bit of Apple stuff. Apple Watch 10 got thinner, a bigger screen, and thinks it will be able to detect sleep apnea with just a gyroscope, which I don't know unless you lay it on your chest. I don't understand, but that sounds interesting. Apple Watch Ultra 2 didn't change at all, except Apple gets to pretend they invented matte black as a finish option for watches now. AirPods Max can finally charge via USB-C instead of Lightning port now, and literally nothing else about them changed except for more colors. But hey, I'm a fan of color. Everything is white and black and gray in this world, and I love to see
there were things that needed
colors.
Improving on those AirPods Max, and that didn't happen.
That didn't happen, but the color is good.
And USB-C.
Features from the AirPods Pro trickled down to the new $130 AirPods 4, including personalized spatial audio, nodding or shaking your head to respond to Siri, and pressure-sensitive controls. The little nodding of the head is actually pretty cool. I want to see that work.
What could ever go wrong with that? There will never be a false positive.
But that's one of those really subtle things that if you're going to talk to a computer, I really wish it could, understand my face and my nods, because that's how humans work. And that might be a thing that you don't notice getting better, but it just gets better. There are new $180 AirPods 4 with ANC, and their charging case supports wireless charging, so that's good. The main announcement, worthy of a little bit of discussion here, AirPods Pro 2 will be classified as over-the-counter hearing aids, pending FDA approval, and you'll be able to adjust them via a quote-unquote clinically validated hearing test that you administer yourself using your iPhone. That's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
And it really could help a lot of people and a lot less trouble. Now, I'm not an expert. I don't know exactly what the procedure is, what technical devices they use to measure the frequency response of your ears, but also perception is different than just what your eardrum is doing. So they could stick a laser in your ear and measure the movement of your eardrum.
Well, it seems as though it's a pretty basic, like from what they were showing at the event, more or less it's just playing tones like you might do at an audiologist, and you tap the screen whenever you can hear that tone, and they just vary the volume.
So it's an EQ.
Yeah. And it basically gives you an audiogram that way, a very simple audiogram based on your responses to the tones that are playing. So they say it takes, 5 to 10 minutes to do that basic audiogram test. This is meant for mild to low, moderate hearing loss. This is not meant for severe hearing loss. But as just an over-the-counter solution for something that you might have already anyway. I think that's pretty cool. And then they do have very good active noise canceling on those AirPods Pro. They do a good job of blocking out outside noises. They have the capability of, if you're speaking to somebody in a crowd and you're having trouble hearing that one voice out of the crowd, you can actually have the person speak into your iPhone's microphone, and that will pass just that audio through to the earphones. Ooh. That's something you can do with hearing aids already, but that'll have that functionality with the AirPods, so that can help in restaurant situations.
Listen, I know one day I'm heading there.
Yeah,
because occasionally,
we all are, most likely,
I realize I'm a guy in a restaurant and everybody's talking, and I'm like, "What?"
Yes, absolutely. So I'll give them some credit for
things
that.
Distort,
I have some hope for them doing that thing. Yeah.
All right. Also, as for the iPhones themselves, this is one of those years where the more expensive Pro and Pro Max models are really just for the highest end users, because the regular iPhone 16 and 16 Plus get almost all the same performance and features, although 120 hertz screens remain exclusive to the Pro models, though, which is kind of ridiculous at this point, considering my 2021 Samsung can do it. Just kind of strange.
So little awkward edit here, but Joe is having some major internet issues. So on the fly, we've made a decision that this week's AVRant episodes is going to be like 2 separate parts, because fingers crossed that if recording with myself and Joe tomorrow works, then we'll have like a CEDIA special with just Joe, which wasn't the original plan. We were originally going to have the 3 of us talking about all the CEDIA stuff at the end of this episode, but that's the plan. That's the explanation. I'm sure everybody can get on board.
Yeah, I hope everybody's okay. Joe's fine. He just disappeared for now.
It's just bad internet, Joe.
Just
Mojo.
Yeah. Not everybody can have this good Alabama internet like I have.
We all got to move.
All right, let's continue on. We were in the middle of some news.
That's right.
If you got yourself the new $4,000 Kaleidescape Strato V player, or Strato 5 player, I assume
it's
that's
V.
a Roman
that one they're
numeral?
calling V. Yeah,
it's a V. Okay. It has 1 terabyte of built-in storage that holds about 10 4K movies at a time. One of the early complaints was that its simplified interface only shows you those 10 downloaded movies. You had to go to your Kaleidescape account on a different device in order to see every Kaleidescape movie you've already purchased, and can therefore download at any time, as long as you have enough storage space, free. Thankfully, Kaleidescape has quickly issued an update, and while you don't get to see your entire collection right on the home screen, you do have the option now to access the Kaleidescape store right on the Strato V player itself. And within the store, you can browse through all the titles you have already bought and download them directly from the Strato V's interface. No more having to use a second device. A couple of quirks remain, though. The store view of your collection is not in alphabetical order. Of course not. Instead, it shows a shifting view of related tiles around whatever title you've highlighted. And if you buy a movie directly from the Strato V's interface, sorry, I was born in Rome.
That's right.
Roman numerals. It'll automatically download right away if you buy a movie directly from the Strato V's interface. There's no option to buy, but not download. Although you can still do that from a second device.
Yeah.
So sounds like a bit of a mess to me. Why are the most expensive things not super slick?
It's certainly an improvement. Because I mean, to me, it wasn't the end of the world, and there was sort of obvious incentives behind it in that they're like, well, they want you to spend the multi thousands of dollars to get a Terra Prime server. That's the upgrade path as far as Kaleidescape hardware and that goes. So they want that incentive of, okay, you're only seeing the 10 movies that are stored on the player itself. You've purchased more. They exist in your library. It's not like they take them away. You can just go on any web browser and go to the Kaleidescape store and see everything that you've purchased. But yeah, they were kind of incentivizing you to try and get a Terra Prime server so that you could see everything that you own in the full big gigantic poster interface. But I like this. There is a way without having to bust out a second device. You're right there with the remote in hand. You can go to the store on the device and you can get yourself, at least see the list of things that you've already purchased in that account. So yeah, that's not the end of the world, and that's a nice improvement. And I would like an alphabetical listing. That is something that seems pretty easy to do, and an obvious thing that they're not doing to annoy you. That's what it feels like to me.
What's crazy I'll tell you what's crazy is that it's actually a better interface when hypothetically, someone like me hypothetically logs in to a friend's hypothetical Plex server
Okay.
with an app on my hypothetical TV to view movies that were hypothetically downloaded by somebody else and uploaded to it. And it's all like perfect movie art poster stuff and in alphabetical order and in 4K HDR. And it wasn't $4,000. Let's move on to another bit of news.
Yeah.
Panasonic, I'm actually excited about this. Panasonic announced the return of their TVs to North America. The flagship Z95A OLED with MLA panel and a heatsink will only come in a 65-inch size, so that's kind of weird. It also has a Technics soundbar attached to the bottom edge and upward-firing speakers behind the top edge. No choice about that. And by the way, back in the day, we always said Techniques, but now I hear people say Technics.
I mean, I've always said Technics, but then I do hear people say Techniques, so I don't actually know which is correct. Right. I'm sure they accept either over there at Panasonic.
Just historically, both Panasonic and Technics were Matsushita, correct?
Yeah, Matsushita. Yeah.
Matsushita.
But they do say it quickly. Yeah, it depends on where you're from.
It depends where, yeah. It depends where you come from. I wish I could speak Japanese. It sounds so cool. But Panasonic has been a big part of my life. My first really good stereo coming out of high school when I got like graduation money. Mm-hmm. I went to Service Merchandise department store back in the day and bought a good Panasonic stereo. I've had Panasonic camcorder and Panasonic headphones and famously the good Panasonic plasma TV we had for 14 years.
Yeah.
Actually, I still have it stored away. It still works.
The thing with Panasonic having been away from the North American market for about 8 years now is that, they do still have their availability in Asia and in Europe. And when reviewers like Vincent Tio have been measuring the Panasonic OLEDs, right? So Panasonic is still purchasing the OLED panels themselves from LG Display, but then they're putting their Panasonic software and their engineers are doing the tuning. It's like a couple of the areas where LG OLED panels struggle a little bit, which is like the very first couple of signal levels just above black. On most OLEDs, that is still just crushed right down to black. It's a tiny little thing. You can pretty much only spot it in test patterns, but like that's one little slight drawback. And then some of the EOTF tracking, the way Panasonic does their tone mapping versus other places in that. It's like for some people, they're like, if you want the very best, particularly that just above black area, those first couple of signal levels, Panasonic was the tops for that. So there are definitely people who are like, oh, why can't I easily get them in North America? People have imported them. Infinite Gary was quick to jump on. He's like, you can get a Panasonic OLED in North America. You just have to import it. That's all. But it's like, now they're coming back. So that's the announcement. So,
that's kind of fun. I just like the brand name. I've never had a bad Panasonic product. Heck, even the batteries in my car are made by Panasonic. It's wild. Everything's Panasonic. The Z85A OLED series does not have MLA panels, but they still have a heat sink and no soundbar along for the ride. 55-inch and 65-inch sizes only, though.
Yeah,
and that is odd.
Limited on screen size options here. That Z95A flagship, 65 inches only, so that's a bit of a shame. No 77, no 83, not even a 55 in that one. And then, Z85A. So, 65 inches as the largest in the OLED size. It's going to cover a lot of people, but a lot of the top tier enthusiasts who are the very people who are willing to spend the money to import a Panasonic, it's a little bit of a shame we don't get the larger sizes here.
That is kind of an odd choice. And then the W95A series of mini LED backlit LCD TVs will come in 55, 65, 75, and 85-inch size options. All of them can do Dolby Vision all the way up to 144 hertz with VRR, and they all run Amazon Fire TV as the user interface. That's an interesting choice. Yeah. Flat Panels HD got the drop on prices, so that high-end 65-inch Z95A is $3,200. The 55-inch Z85A is $1,600, and the 65-inch Z85A is $1,800. And then the W95A comes in, let's see, what were the sizes? 55, 65, 75, 85?
That's right.
The dollar figures are $1,300, $1,800, $2,300, and $3,000 with hundreds of dimming zones.
Which is not the highest by any means. We are
Right.
well into the thousands of dimming zones on competing mini LED TVs these days. So, those aren't the highest prices as far as mini LED TVs go. Certainly not the lowest, but not the highest. So, they're sort of landing in the middle on those mini LED TV models. And then, the Z85A, that's pretty reasonably priced, $1,600 and $1,800 for 55-inch and 65-inch. But those are more equivalent to like the C4 series coming out of LG. So, pretty similar prices there. And yeah, it's almost like they're sort of dipping a toe back in, seeing how it goes. I'm sure if it goes really well, then more screen sizes will be available in future years.
Yeah, man, that Panasonic Plasma that we bought, it was one of the first high-def TVs I saw in a department store, high-def flat screen TVs that I saw. And it's just, I remember when it was $10,000 for a 50-inch Panasonic Plasma. Wow. Them's was the days. Moving on. TCL announced their new flagship mini LED backlit LCD TV series for 2025 at IFA in Berlin. It'll be the QM952G series in North America, also called X965 in Europe and X11H in Asia. Why? We don't know. You just can't say X in North America, I guess.
Something like that, yeah.
There are just two screen sizes, 85-inch and 98-inch. The 85-inch has over 10,000 local dimming zones, and the 98-inch has over 14,000 zones with 6,500 nits peak light output. Man, remember when only at trade shows did they ever wheel in a 98-inch television?
Right, I know. And,
remember when a projector would struggle to do a 98?
They are calling this a new series, like a QM9 series. They're sticking with the 50, when it ended in a 50, that was 2023. When it ended in a 51, that was 2024. Now it's going to be ending in a 52. That'll be 2025. So that's consistent, but slightly confusing.
Consistent, but unnecessarily. Just make it 25 if it's a 2025 model.
But, this year in 2024, we're topping out with the QM851.
Yeah.
So this will be a new series above that, a QM9 series above the QM8 series. But given like the current 2024 flagship 98-inch QM851 is at $4,000 right now.
Yeah.
Which for a 98-inch flagship performance TV is really not that bad, all things considered.
Like immediately I think on that 98-inch TV, what is the vertical height? Can you get it through your door?
You can get it through your door.
So what do you have to turn it a little at an angle?
If you got a tight stairway, you are not managing that.
You're not going to pivot that thing in the stairway.
That's going to be a trick. So so this will be a new series, but I mean, I'm not estimating that we're going to have astronomical prices on these. It'll probably be MSRP 6,000 or 7,000 or something like that. But if this is a street price around $5,000 for the 98-inch, it wouldn't be a shock coming from TCL. So. Yeah,
that's cool.
Looking forward to that.
You're going to see a lot of those in sports bars, that's for sure.
They're already going past what that new Portrait Displays C6 5000 light meter can reliably read. They're already like 6,500 nits, not 5,000. We've already destroyed you.
Yeah, when the sun comes up in a scene, it's going to give you a sunburn on this TV. Right. All right, Klipsch has some news. They announced the first soundbar to come with Dirac live room correction. The Klipsch Flexus Core 300 soundbar sells for $1,000 and claims to be a 5.1.2 configuration all on its own. There's a single horn-loaded tweeter for the center channel with 4 2.25-inch drivers on the front, 2 more on the sides, and 2 more on the top, and then 4 4-inch drivers acting as the built-in subwoofer/woofer. Basically it's a box that looks like Swiss cheese.
It's a pretty standard looking soundbar, but it is quite wide, at least going by the photo. That is a beefy width soundbar.
It's a beefy width. It's a meaty soundbar. It's delicious. Right. You can add on a pair of wireless, except for the power cords, Flexus surround speakers, which have both forward and upward firing drivers. And you can add up to 2 wireless Flexus 212-inch subwoofers. Plus, there's an RCA subwoofer output too. But the big marketing buzz is about the inclusion of Dirac Live. Mm-hmm. The included license is for the limited bandwidth version so that you get the privilege of paying extra to unlock Dirac Live Full. Make you feel better about yourself. The subwoofers are not independent, so proper Dirac Live bass control doesn't seem likely as a future optional update. A measurement microphone is included with SoundBar, and the intention is to use the phone app version of Dirac.
Yeah.
And again, when I see Dirac, I'm like, does it make a difference in my life? Well, I've never heard it. I need to find a way to hear it and somehow compare it.
You can purchase yourself a brand new Denon AV receiver and pay the price so that you have both Odyssey and Dirac, and you can compare them head to head with those two speaker presets.
I'd rather fly to your place and have a vacation as part of that cost.
Right. Oh, but so Vox International, they did have a press release a couple of weeks ago that was more or less just so Vox International, they're now the parent company of Onkyo and Pioneer and Integra and Klipsch and a few other companies as well. And they had this weird press release a couple weeks ago that we didn't bother mentioning on the podcast where they're just like, yeah, Vox International and Dirac, we like each other. And that was pretty much the press release. This is one of the first actual tangible things coming out of that arrangement, that partnership, where they're like, yeah, we're going to be the first soundbar you can get with Dirac built in as the room correction program. So that's kind of cool.
Soundbars trying to do surround sound still blows my mind with firing sound in little beams everywhere.
That's right.
Like the Yamaha one is pretty good, I think.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Onkyo has added the $1,200 TX-RZ30 AV receiver to its lineup. At first, it appears to be almost identical to the TX NR7100, but with the addition of a full set of pre-outs and the upgraded built-in amps of the RZ series. Just like the NR7100, the RZ30 has 9 amplifiers built in and tops out at processing 9 speakers. There's no option to add external amps and expand the channel count to 11. But the RZ30 has one additional trick up its sleeve. It's the only other model besides the RZ70 that can be upgraded to use Dirac Live bass control with independent dual subwoofer outputs. The 11-channel RZ50 can't do that, and none of the NR series models can either.
Yeah.
So there's your main difference.
So, this is somewhat reminiscent of that new Denon A10H that Tom and I talked about last week, where it's like they're building in just as many amplifiers as the unit can process. They're not doing the we have this number of amps, but we can actually process more channels. They're not doing that anymore, which is, I don't know, maybe that's based on some like consumer research feedback type of thing where they just discovered that people were never going beyond the number of built-in amplifiers, and having the additional processing to do more channels beyond the number of built-in amplifiers just wasn't paying dividends. I mean,
they weren't getting the money. People were buying other simple stereo amps to do the remaining 2 channels they wanted to do.
Because I could certainly believe that, right? I could certainly believe that if they did the research and they're like, okay, so with our RZ50 that has 9 amplifiers built in but can process 11 channels, how many people are actually doing that? How many people are adding the 2 channels minimum of external amplification and expanding to 11 versus just they get up to 9 and they stop? It's probably, I would certainly be willing to believe that the majority of people who do that purchasing, they just stick with the number of built-in amps. So
I'd love to know what raw number of people in this universe do anything above 9.
Yeah.
How many people have the 11 or the 13 or the 15? I'd love to know. I mean, not even what percentage, because it's going to be such a sliver. But like just exact number of people. Are there 1,000 people that do that? Are there? I don't know.
I mean, there's enough that, companies like Trinnov and Storm are staying in business. So, but they're, So for the more mass market price point, how many are actually doing that? Denon is kind of becoming the only game in town for going beyond 11, right? Because Onkyo's not doing it, Pioneer's not doing it, Yamaha's not doing it. So,
it's just so few people have a space where it makes any sense. There's just practical limits. That's the problem. That's the problem in my house. I can't foresee ever somehow rearranging things. I'd have to rebuild half the house to create a space to do it in. So is it time to go to actual questions?
It is. Why not on this question and answer podcast? Let's answer some questions.
We'll go for a while. Let's just see what happens. It's a loosey-goosey show. Things have gone strange today.
That's right.
Let's do some questions. So we've got a question from last week from Stan. Stan's been watching a lot of Matthew Poe's videos, and Matthew has been emphasizing the importance of time aligning your subwoofers with your speakers in order to optimize the crossover, which sounds like it requires neutrinos and time travel, but we'll see. He says this typically needs to be done manually since the various automatic room correction systems don't always catch the issues that can occur in the crossover between the speakers and the subwoofers. In Stan's case, he's just thinking about his 2.1 basement setup using a Marantz Slimline NR1710 receiver and a single subwoofer, since he only cares about one seat in this particular setup. It's in an L-shaped room with no door on either end of the stairs. He's got lots and lots of room behind his seat, and he's treated directly behind the pair of speakers on the front wall and at the first reflection points on the side walls with 5-inch thick bass straps from Gick. Despite all of the space, he has some placement restrictions when it comes to a single subwoofer, so it is currently about 1 foot away from the right side wall and about 9 feet from the front corner. Has Odyssey taken care of time alignment for his system, or would a professional audio calibrator be able to optimize his system further? Is there some inexpensive way for him to do the manual time alignment himself? Again, when I hear time alignment, I'm like, what?
What we're talking about here is there are, of course, some frequencies in the crossover region between the bottom end of your speakers and the top end of your subwoofer, where those two sound sources, or three sound sources, if you're talking about left, right, and subwoofer all playing together, they are playing some notes in common, some frequencies in common. The subwoofer is playing sounds that your front speakers or any speakers in your system are also playing, and they're all playing together. So naturally, anytime that you have two sound sources in physically different locations of your room playing notes in common, you could end up in a situation where the direct notes, the direct sound waves themselves emanating from those sound producing things, plus the reflections in your room as well, because you can't avoid those, result in cancellations at certain spots in the room or doubling up of those notes, as the sound waves reach each other and pass through each other. If they're both, pressurizing in the same direction at the same time in the certain location, you get doubles up. If they're going in opposite directions in the location at the same time, they cancel each other out.
All right. I got it. Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. So not as exotic as it sounds.
No. It's just, you got the same note being played by two different things from two different locations. So you get some sound wave interaction at certain locations. It might be your seat, right? So that's what we're talking about here. Yeah. So the way that an automatic room correction system, be that Odyssey, be that Dirac, be that any of them, the way that they do time alignment of all of your speakers and your subwoofers is when they play that test tone sound, it's really just a measurement of it knows electronically when the signal was sent, and then it measures the delay between that electronic signal versus when the sound actually reached the microphone.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it just calculates however many milliseconds that is as being the distance from the speaker to the microphone. And all it does is say, okay, so your front left speaker, we measured that at a distance of 9.5 feet. We measured your front right speaker as actually being 10 feet, physically away from the microphone. And we measured the response from the subwoofer as being 12 feet away. Right. So we apply half of a millisecond extra delay to your front left speaker. So now your front left speaker and your front right speaker, those sounds arrive at the same time. And then we apply another 2 milliseconds of delay to both of those things so that the subwoofer that was measured as being 12 feet away, its sound arrives at the microphone at the same time as the two speakers. And now we've time aligned all of those things to that microphone position. The signal goes out, but small amounts of millisecond or half a millisecond delay are applied to the speakers that are physically closer to you. And now, once that original signal plays, all of those sounds arrive at the same time. So that's fine. That is technically time alignment. That's what the room correction systems do. Does that result in, having perfectly even frequency response at your ears? And the answer is no, it doesn't always result in that. Plus, if you have more than one seat, then you're running into, okay, what's happening in the other seats in my room?
Right.
So there is absolutely a very inexpensive way for you to do this. It just costs time because it's trial and error. That's what it is.
There's that, yeah.
Yeah. What you're doing is just playing a sweep through your system. Of course you could measure with something like Room EQ Wizard to get a visual graph of what's going on, but you can do it just with your ears, and you absolutely can hear what happens if you have a fully variable phase knob on your subwoofer. If you play with that, then you can absolutely hear as you have a sweep that's playing through your system. You're just putting it in regular stereo listening mode so that the sweep is playing through your speakers and the subwoofer. They're working together like they normally will. You play that sweep and you play with that fully variable phase knob while you're sitting in your chair, or, have a friend do it so that you can have
That's the tough part.
Yeah. That's why I'm saying it's inexpensive but time consuming if you're doing it alone. Sheer trial and error. And it's like, oh, you can hear, okay, if I turn that phase knob 70 degrees or something like that, I can hear a hump in that sweep now, or a dip in that sweep now, right in that crossover region that wasn't there when I turned the fully variable phase knob to 30 degrees or 20 or something like that. But it's pure trial and error.
That sounds like I'm having too many flashbacks to the 12-step program.
To the 12-step guide. I mean, that's what it was. The 12-step guide for setting up dual subwoofers, that is doing that exact thing for two subwoofers. Now you're doing the same thing for a subwoofer versus speakers. It is exactly the same principle, and it's
I don't recommend it.
I know, but it's inexpensive. It doesn't cost money.
That's true. It doesn't cost money. Just your sanity.
Is there a way? And is a professional calibrator going to do anything wildly different? They'll probably measure to do it instead. They'll probably bring in a measurement microphone and use a program like Room EQ Wizard or something equivalent. But that's what they'll be doing. They'll be looking at it graphically. Maybe they'll do a little calculation to see what can happen. But the thing is, for a single
seating,
going to do
much more than your room correction on your amplifier.
Well, it's just that the room correction is just going to do that straight calculation of when did the sound arrive. And that doesn't always result in not a hump or not a dip at your actual seat. It doesn't always result in that. So yeah, the trial and error version or the measurement version, that's how you would do it. The way you would adjust it is either the fully variable phase knob on your sub, or if your subwoofer lacks a fully variable phase knob, it would be adjusting the distance setting for the subwoofer in the AV receiver, because you have pretty good latitude on the distance setting of the subwoofer, and that accomplishes the same thing. It's just applying a delay to the signal rather than changing the electrical phase. But in the end, you end up with the same result. So yeah, there's absolutely ways to do that. Playing a sweep on repeat and listening to it is the cheap way to do it, but the time costly way to do it.
Listening to it 100 times at least.
And Matthew Pose is absolutely correct that the automatic systems can trip that up. If you care about that, you want that sweep to sound like a even, smooth sweep. There shouldn't be a big hump or a big dip anywhere in that sweep. That's not what the signal said to do, so that's not what you should hear. You should hear a nice, smooth, everything is about the same volume throughout that entire sweep. But the other thing you can do is, if you do have a system like Dirac, or you have a system like Multi-Q X, which wouldn't apply in this particular case with an NR1711, but if you had those systems, one thing you can do in those systems is increase how steep the slope is in the crossover. So rather, because most of them just apply a 24 decibels per octave slope on the top end of the subwoofer, but only a 12 decibel per octave shallower slope on the bottom end of the speakers. And one thing you can do is make that steeper, like 24 decibels per octave on both sides. And that means there are fewer frequencies playing in common between those two things.
Less overlap.
There's less overlap. And that solves a lot of these issues just doing that. So if you have the ability to do that. Well, but in his case, he doesn't. So yeah, it's basically trial and error, or honestly, that's all a calibrator is going to do too.
Exactly. Stan has a Panamax PM8 GAV surge protector that he bought back in 2012. It has status lights to indicate proper house wiring, grounding, and operation. And those are all green, meaning good. But he's read that the status lights cannot always be trusted. Ah, you must worry about all of the things. You sound like you have my anxiety. Is that model the type of surge protector that degrades over time? Like, obviously, if those status lights ever turn red, he'll know there's a problem. But if the status lights remain green, will there come a time when it's a good idea to replace the unit anyway? He does have a whole house surge protector on his electrical panel for the house. So will that help to prolong the life of his Panamax? Now, I would assume if you have a whole house surge protector, that at least lessens the number of surges it's going to get to the Panamax in the first place.
So I mean, typically the whole house surge protector on your actual electrical panel is for catastrophe. It's for a lightning strike.
That's what I need.
Right.
I've had lightning blow things up in this house.
For smaller surges and things like that, the panel one typically lets those through because those aren't catastrophic. Those aren't melt your house down, cause a fire type of things. It's there to prevent lightning strike, level damage, the one at the panel. So small surges still get through those. And yes, I looked up that PM8 GIV. They are not explicit. They don't say exactly what type of surge protection that it has, but they do talk about in the event of a large strike that it clamps, that there is no undoing that clamping
It's gone.
once it happens, which is good. That's what a surge protector should do. It should mean that if you get that level of surge, it just stops the electricity from getting to your components. It sacrifices itself to save the gear that's plugged into it.
I've had a surge protector do that, and you love it and you thank it for its service.
Because it costs a lot less than the stuff that you've plugged into it.
That's right.
And so it's a metal oxide varistor, like most other surge protectors. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is sacrificial. And it is cumulative. If you have lots of small little surge events, frequent blackouts in your neighborhood where the power then gets turned back on while you're out of the house and there's a surge and inrush of current while that happens, eventually that metal oxide varistor will trip. The power will stop going through your Panamax and you'll be like, hey, what's going on? I flicked the switch a bunch of times and it doesn't work. Oh, turns out it has sacrificed itself at this point and it will need to be replaced at that point. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not something that you need to particularly worry about. It'll happen to all of our APC surge protectors at some point, and that's what they're supposed to do. It's a good thing when that happens. It means they saved your gear from absorbing those surges itself. So that is the situation there. In terms of people saying that it can't be trusted, it's like you're not going to use a Panamax surge protector in place of a house inspector when you're doing your house wiring inspection while the house is being built. It's not that level of correct, You could still have a grounding issue from one side of your house to the other, and the Panamax isn't going to tell you that. So it's not in place of a house inspector, that type of thing. But in terms of like, is this outlet functioning? Yeah, it'll tell you that, and it's absolutely fine.
Sure. And so after some number of years, it may have absorbed enough little surges that it is actually now a weaker surge protector.
Well, it just means
in other words, at some point you should replace it.
Well, yeah, I mean the next surge that goes beyond its melting point, the metal oxide varistor's melting point, it's going to melt, it's going to clamp as it should, and that's going to be the end of that.
You see what I'm getting at? You can just wait till it dies, then get another one.
Absolutely wait until it dies. Yeah.
There you go. So you good. Hey, new questions.
That's right. Look at us.
Look at us doing some new questions. Yeah, at least for
we're like
while.
An hour into the podcast recording itself, but we're like 2 hours into this call. So
yeah, let's do some of these, but maybe not all.
Whatever Lee can handle. That's what I'm.
That's
here
fine.
for
Let's
today.
go. Henry has a question. Henry was glad to hear Tom and Rob's response when he asked if he should go to the trouble of taking down the foam acoustic treatments he had secured to his ceiling, since he had done the lion's share of improvements already by replacing all of his foam wall treatments with proper insulation-based acoustic panels. We said not to worry about changing his ceiling, and that saved him going up and down a ladder, so that was good news in his book.
Yeah.
I think I remember hearing that one. On a different subject, back in 2019, he bought an MX890 universal remote from the brand Universal Remote Control, or URC, and he had it professionally programmed. He didn't have smart lighting, motorized curtains, smart thermostat, or any other smart home components, so it was strictly for controlling his home theater gear in his home theater room, and it's been rock solid.
Good.
The MX890 is part of URC's Complete Control series, which sounds very ominous. It sounds something like the FBI has. URC markets it as their entry-level single-room series that consists of traditional wand-style remotes with physical buttons and a programmable screen on top, plus a base station that takes RF signals from the remote and converts them to IR signals to control your gear. For more advanced multi-room setups with full-on smart home automation, whole house audio, security system integration, and primarily touchscreen controllers, although wand-style remotes are still an option too, URC offers their Total Control series, which also
I'm not sure why
sounds
Total is above complete, but that's what they've decided.
Yeah, that. Do they have another? It's like absolute ultimate control.
Most likely. You started with complete control, but that wasn't enough. You had to get to total control. But
don't start
primarily
at the top.
About touchscreens at this point and multi-room. Yeah,
you got to watch where you're going with your adjectives, and rather than a little base station that takes RF signals and converts them to IR, you get a rack-mountable processor, and everything connects over IP via your Ethernet network. You typically control as many of your home theater components as you can via direct IP connections, but converters, sensors, and gateways are offered so that you can control just about anything, even if direct IP control is not an option. So, Henry is in a one-bedroom place. He's primarily concerned with controlling consumer electronics and his home theater and not everything in the universe. Not so much smart home stuff or a big whole house audio system. He's been really happy with his URC setup for his home theater, so he's contemplated upgrading to a Total Control offering, basically just because.
Yeah.
Do we think it would be total overkill? Yeah. And not worth it at all? Yeah. Or are there advantages over the Complete Control series that would make him feel as though he got good value out of making the change? It sounds like a lot. Total and complete.
Yeah. I get confused by those, honestly. But
right.
So, I mean, if what he's talking about is controlling his home theater gear in his home theater room,
yeah,
I can't think of any honest reason I would justify spending the price to going to the Total Control system. I guess what he's getting at is IP-based control somehow so superior to infrared-based control that alone would be enough to do it. Because the thing is, Universal Remote Control, URC, they do have another series, which is Total Control Lite.
A little bit of control.
Right, which is more than one room. It's like 4 rooms, right? And it still has like wand-style remotes. It has a couple of touchscreen options, but not as many as the full Total Control series. This is the Total Control Lite series, so everything is pared back a little bit. And I'm like, that to me in a one-bedroom living situation would seem like it would make a lot more sense if, and like IFF version of if and only if, you're thinking about doing something in more than just your home theater room, right? Because if you are thinking, well, I also have a TV in the bedroom, or I also have a TV and a soundbar in the living room, or I also have a pair of speakers in the kitchen, and it would be kind of cool to control all of those things from one single interface, well then yeah, I could get on board in a one-bedroom apartment or condo, whatever the situation is, of being a Total Control Lite. That kind of makes sense. It's more than just a single room.
Right.
I don't see any reason to go to the full Total Control series that's meant for much bigger situations than that. That doesn't make any sense under any circumstance in your current living situation. But yeah, if it really is just the home theater room, if it's a single room solution, I don't think that going to the IP-based control, I'm a little bit surprised. There's no mention of Bluetooth control for any of them. And it's like all of our streaming devices, they use Bluetooth remotes. They don't use IR or IP. They use Bluetooth. I'm not saying that it's impossible, because Universal Remote Control has a lot of options, including like all of the additional gateways and stuff that you can add. So there probably is a Bluetooth solution, but it's just not immediate in what they talk about on their website. I think that's pretty much it. I think I pretty much landed on it, right? If you really are just talking about controlling what you're already controlling with your system in the one room, in the home theater system, and it's the home theater gear, I can't think of a good justification to change.
No, I wouldn't change anything from there.
But one bedroom, got some other stuff in your house, it would be kind of cool to control those too. The Total Control Lite is exactly for you. I think that makes sense.
But if you're in a 1-bedroom place, I don't think I'd even put speakers in the other. Just turn the volume up.
Well,
like if you're in the kitchen,
that might bother neighbors.
Well, I used to think I wanted to use the AV receiver as a hub for everything and have another set of speakers in the kitchen, for instance. And I just ended up buying nice speakers for the kitchen and using an old tablet as the music source. And it's just so much easier to have dedicated stuff. Okay. A question from Robert G. Back in episode number 922, Tom and Rob made recommendations for which acoustic products we thought Robert should buy for his dedicated media room and where we thought he should put them. He's gone ahead and ordered a bunch of bass traps and acoustic panels from GIK, and he's looking forward to getting them installed and then finally running Dirac on his Emotiva XMC1 processor. Despite having owned the Emotiva XMC1 for a while, he's never actually run Dirac before. So can we offer him some technical advice about how to run it properly? Is it super simple and you just follow some on-screen directions? Or are there things you need to be aware of beforehand and potential issues that a first-time user might run into? And after he has optimized his setup with Dirac, under what circumstances would he ever need to run it again? I can tell you, I am only going to run one automated thing. If it takes more effort than that, I was so traumatized that one time I tried to do Rob's 12-stepper thing. I needed therapy after that. I want automated. So I don't know. I've never used Dirac. It's like I was saying earlier in the podcast. I need to go somewhere and hear it. I need to go to a big city. The closest one for me is probably Atlanta or Nashville.
Even then, you'd be taking a single instance of it as your example, right? So it's hard to draw conclusions of a thing that has so many variables inherent to it and say that this thing is responsible for it. But the second part first, under what circumstances would you run it again? I mean, depending on how anal retentive you are about these things, I mean, technically anytime you change something in your system, if you increase or decrease the furniture in your room, if you alter the positioning of your speakers, if you add more speakers, if you take away speakers, if you move your subs, like any of these things, any change in your system that impacts the acoustics. I mean, let's say before you had made the purchase of all the acoustic treatments that we recommended that you get, if you had run Dirac in your room without the acoustic treatments, and then the acoustic treatments arrive and you put them all up, you should run Dirac again. They have impacted the acoustics of your room. So it's anytime there's a change, that's when you would run it again. It is not as simple and user-friendly to run as Odyssey is. It is not as simple as you plug a microphone into the front of your AV receiver, because you don't even do that in your case. The microphone doesn't get connected to your Emotiva at all. But it isn't as simple as you plug it in, the on-screen interface comes up, and it basically walks you through it step by step. Okay. It isn't that simple with Dirac. It's not the end of the world, but it isn't that simple and easy to use. And Dirac has some specificity to it in its preliminary setup that is a little bit different from brand to brand. NAD, for example, has some pretty specific settings for NAD products when you're using their implementation of Dirac, and Emotiva is similar. So I'm going to start you off. I'll have 3 YouTube links in the show notes for this episode. Emotiva, back when the XMC1 first came out, they have their own Emotiva setup tutorial for that model specifically. The user interface of Dirac did get updated since then, because that was quite a few years ago when the XMC1 first came out. So they have an updated tutorial which shows the newer interface. They're talking about using it with their current line of pre-pros, of course, over at Emotiva, but the user interface will still look similar even with your XMC1. So it would be a very good idea to go through all of those, because they talk about some of that preliminary setup that you do need to go through before you even begin measuring with Dirac. So to give you a little preview of what they're going to talk about, the Dirac system in the Emotiva XMC1 does not do any sort of automatic speaker detection. Like if you use Odyssey, it just tries to put a signal through every conceivable speaker that you might have connected. And they're like, well, if I got a sound, then you have that speaker. If I didn't get a sound, then you don't have that speaker. And it automatically configures itself for you. The
Nice.
Emotiva XMC1, it's manual. You have to tell it before you begin Dirac in the speaker preset menu, the manual speaker preset menu.
Sure.
These are the speakers that I have, and you have to do that manually beforehand. Emotiva also recommends zero out the trim level, although you can, Dirac will actually ignore whatever is set while it's taking its measurements, and then you can manually change the trim levels afterward to give your center speaker a little extra boost, give your subwoofer output a little extra boost. You can do that, but as a starting point, they're just zero it out beforehand so you know where you're starting. And then similarly, just default all of your distance settings to your speakers. Don't have those at different distances. Again, Dirac will actually ignore those, but then whatever you have set manually will get laid on top of that. So okay, just default all of those, zero at the trim levels, get the proper speaker configuration already planned, and then begin Dirac. So when you do that, the Dirac microphone actually plugs into a laptop or a computer. That's where the software runs. And you have to have the Emotiva Pre-Pro, your XMC1, connected to the same Ethernet, Wi-Fi network as your laptop or computer. That's how those two devices communicate with each other. And the Emotiva XMC1, I don't think has Wi-Fi built in, so it's an Ethernet connection that you have to have. It has to be on the network for this to work. That's basically what you need to do preliminarily before you begin. But there is one more thing I want to point out.
I was about to say, that wouldn't be so traumatizing. What's the one more thing, though?
Yeah, it's still not quite as simple as I just plugged in a microphone and it began and I followed the on-screen instructions.
Yeah,
so
I like that better, but I could handle manually putting in speakers and stuff like that.
It's not too bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is one more thing, and this is universal across all versions of Dirac, doesn't matter what brand's implementation. They do not set an automatic reference volume level for you. They don't automatically say when I turn my master volume to 0 dB on a relative volume scale that as part of the process, we're going to adjust all the trim levels so that 0 dB on your volume dial equals cinema reference volume. They're kind of hey, you get to choose what reference volume is. You, the user, get to decide what that is for your own personal taste. They will level match all of your speakers, but they don't automatically set it so that 0 dB on your master volume dial is cinema reference volume the way that Odyssey does or the way that Wipeout does.
Is there any good reason to not make it 0 dB?
I mean, I don't think so, but there are some people who are I want -10 to be reference. I don't know. There's people who do that. So part of the process is before you start taking the measurements, Dirac will get you to set the microphone gain, which I hate, but they have to because they don't actually know what microphone you're using for sure, because you could use a different microphone plugged into your laptop. And they don't know if your laptop is doing something weird to the gain of the microphone that you plugged in on your Windows system, because it certainly might. So you have to set the microphone gain. And what they'll do is you're actually just sort of listening to the ambient noise in your room. And they want that to have a reading of -40, right? So the microphone gain should be showing that, the noise floor is at -40. Just the ambient
Getting a
noise
little nitpicky here.
I know. This is in the tutorials, but I'm mentioning it here.
Still doable, but getting a little...
Yeah, and that's based on the expected dynamic range of the microphone that you're using. So ambient noise floor is at -40. And then... you basically have to find the speaker that's playing the quietest, which is a little bit of trial and error, because that one you can kind of leave at the default gain level for each speaker, because there's a whole interface of all the speakers in your system. And that gets set at the default, but then all of the other speakers that are louder than that, you manually drop them down before you begin the process. I know.
I think we might have crossed my limit.
There you go. Yeah. And then you set the master volume for where you want reference volume to be, right? No. So there is this is all covered in Emotiva's tutorials.
Right.
It's not the end of the world, but there's definitely more manual process before you begin measurements. Last thing I want to mention, in the interface, I kind of hate it because there's two areas where it kind of looks like you can proceed to the next step. One of them is going to the next speaker. which is what you want to do while you're doing your measurements, right? And that's basically the measure next, measure next, measure next. Pretty self-explanatory. But there's also another button that says proceed, or it might even be just next, that's down at the bottom. And that takes you to the entire next stage of the Dirac process.
And it's not labeled as such.
Well, I mean, like I say, measure next is pretty self-explanatory, but there is this other button that's proceed or next at the bottom. And the first time you're doing it, you definitely might press that instead because it's the bigger button.
Yeah.
So that's just a thing to be aware of.
Yeah, that's not good design. All right. Moving on to another question. It's Infinite Gary.
Of course it is.
Yes, Gary wasn't actually looking for a podcast answer to the pre-pro scenario we're about to discuss, but it's an interesting topic. And it has been years since I've done a podcast and didn't have an Infinite Gary question.
It is absolutely why I included this.
If Lee is co-hosting and filling in for Tom or Rob, we better have an Infinite Gary question. Mm-hmm. So, in Gary's Dolby Atmos room, and we all have a Dolby Atmos room in our house just for Dolby Atmos.
That's right.
He's got a 7.2.4 configuration using Revel speakers all around for the floor level, a pair of SVS ported subs, and 4 PSB Atmos modules. It's all controlled with a Lexicon MC10 Pre-Pro with Dirac on board. And he has zero intention of adding any more speakers in this room. He's topping out at 11. That sounds like plenty of speakers. But he did come across a B-stock JBL SDP75 on closeout. It is the JBL rebranded version of a Trinnov Altitude 16, and it comes with speaker correction files already built in for most JBL and Revel speaker models, including all the ones he's using for his floor level. It would still be very expensive.
Yeah, over $20,000 we're talking about here, so...
Hang on, let me just get another swig of water after this.
Yeah. I mean, you should have taken that earlier, and then so you could spit it out.
God. Okay, but having spoken with a calibrator, they said that with his 7.2.4 configuration, zero plan to change that, and a room that is already acoustically treated, and his speakers well positioned, there isn't really anything different that the JBL would offer him over his Lexicon feature-wise, and that if a professional calibrator puts in the time, either Dirac or Trinnov is going to deliver very good, but very similar end results in his setup. That all said, Gary is always interested in additional thoughts on this sort of decision. So, what are our thoughts here? Lexicon versus JBL synthesis, Dirac versus Trinnov. If he could do a direct A/B comparison, what would it reveal? My guess is not much. The calibrator already told you that it's not going to be a big difference. So, heard me in the last question say, I want all automated just done. Right. And I just can't imagine that it would be worth the expense, the time, the effort. The calibrator already said it, right? That's my thought.
I mean, if you were expanding beyond 11 speakers, then that is something that the JBL can do that your current Lexicon cannot. Your current Lexicon tops out at 11. The JBL that you're considering can go up to 15.1, 9.1.6 configuration. But if there's zero chance of that happening in this room, and this is not Gary's largest room. I mean, it's already pretty crammed in there.
Just the Dolby Atmos room.
This is the Dolby Atmos room. I mean, it looks like it was basically a spare bedroom, and it is not gigantic, and it makes no sense to cram additional speakers in there. So this is something that I touched upon before. When you're talking about let's say a pre-pro without any room correction, just a pre-pro, that's a lot of variables. That is not one component, right? You change one pre-pro for another. It's tempting. A lot of people intuitively say, well, I changed one thing. So if I hear a difference, it's because the pre-pro changed, right? There's a logic to that, but it's an erroneous conclusion to draw. That, that one component is capable of changing many variables in the signal. So you have not changed one variable. Now you add room correction on top of that. And we're talking about room correction like Dirac Live and Trinnov Room Optimizer, where they themselves have a virtually infinite number of variables that could be changed. So the problem is like what would it reveal? It would reveal more about the listener than it would about either piece of equipment or either room correction system. Because if I'm the listener, I'm going to listen to them and I'm going to go, first one sounds nice. Second one sounds nice. Either they sound the same. Great. I expected that. Or they sound slightly different. Oh, well. Because my conclusion that I draw is I have no idea what was responsible for the difference or non-difference that I heard. There are so many variables at play, and I am completely confident that if I wanted to make those two systems sound identical to each other, that as long as the time is available to do it, it's absolutely possible to make those two systems sound identical, exactly like the professional calibrator that Gary talked to. As long as the calibrator puts in the time, you can make them sound exactly the same. Both of them have the capabilities to do that. But there are some listeners who will listen to the two systems, even if there's literally objectively no difference, they will believe that there is one. It's a cited test, and they have whatever, bias that they had whenever they were coming in there. Or if there is like a genuinely, objectively measurable and audible difference, they'll attribute all of that difference to the brand or the model of pre-pro or the room correction system. And that's what it'll reveal. It'll reveal what type of listener are you? What type of person are you? Are you the type of person who goes, I have no idea what caused the difference that I'm hearing, and I don't really care that much. Like, it doesn't help me make a decision because I don't know what's responsible for this. Or are you the type of person who goes, well, when I went golfing the first time, and then the second time I went golfing, I changed my clubs, my shoes, the golf course I was on, and the type of ball I was using, and I got a lower score the second time, so I'm never wearing those shoes again. That's the conclusion that I draw.
It's a bit of an ink blot personality test, isn't it?
That's what it reveals.
Yeah. It reveals the psychological approach taken by the listener.
Yeah. And I mean, look, it's your money or it's the other listener's money. You're allowed to make the decision however you want to. It's your money. But if I'm offering advice, I'm going to be saying the only conclusion you can draw from even a direct A-B comparison is an erroneous one. That's the only conclusion you can really... I mean, other than your conclusion being, I have no idea what caused this difference. Which of the multitude of variables that could be changed by a professional calibrator, which of those multitudes is responsible?
The respect I would have for someone if they spent that much money and then said, I can't tell any difference, I would have so much respect for that person to admit that would be amazing. I would trust that person from then on with like everything. Like, wow, can't believe you even said it. That's amazing. Yeah, so I get what you're saying, but trust that professional calibrator. That's a step too far.
That's a great calibrator to tell you that, right? Because I'm assuming he wasn't actually buying this device through that calibrator, but even if you were, I mean, if they're willing to say, hey, look, man, I mean, in your setup, they can both sound phenomenal. We're not saying like if you had bought the JBL instead of the Lexicon to begin with, it's not like you bought something bad. Far from it. But there's no inherent upgrade happening here.
Yeah, a lot of respect for anybody that will tell you that, okay, you already have the best you're going to get for your situation.
That's right.
If your situation changes, talk to me again.
Yeah.
If something changes, that's okay. Well, I hope that was good enough for Gary, even though he wasn't going to make that into an official question. It had to be because I'm here.
Well, and also I think it's a fun one to discuss because we come across it all the time. That's my favorite thing, misattribution, right? Yeah. That people say, here's what I changed in my system, so that's got to be responsible for whatever visual or audio change that I detected. And it's like, you changed more than one variable. You might not have been aware of it, but that's what happened.
Right. It's not scientific unless you change one thing at a time.
Right.
Robert A. has some extensive question here. Last week, Robert told us about his setup using a Marantz SR7011 receiver connected to two different displays, a 75-inch Hisense TV and a BenQ HD3550 projector. When he would go to use the projector, he would get intermittent video signal dropouts as long as the Hisense TV was physically still connected, even if the TV was in standby. As soon as he unplugged the TV, the projector worked perfectly fine, and no amount of changing HDMI cables helped at all. Reminds me of my situation in this office I'm in right now, because I have a TV on the wall in front of me that I don't always use, but if it's plugged in, it makes a difference to the computer.
Right.
Rob went through how to change the Marantz's HDMI output settings so that it would only use monitor 1 or monitor 2 rather than having both HDMI output ports active at the same time. But it turns out Robert does want to have the option of using both displays simultaneously. So he looked into the HD Fury devices that Rob mentioned last week as being the best solution for that. It appears as though either the HD Fury integral.
I say integral, but integral could work.
The HD Fury Integral 2 or the HD Fury Vertex would do what he needs. Or any of the even more expensive HD Fury models, of course. But both of those are right around the $300 mark. So in looking for a less expensive alternative, he found the HDMI splitter options from the brand OREI. Oray?
I say Oray, but
Oray,
I have no idea.
And it's all capital letters. Like
it is. It does seem like an acronym, though. It can be pronounced.
Oray. He bought one and tried it out. And it worked at first. But then it died very quickly. So that has soured him on the Oray brand. More like the Oh No brand. Doesn't sound good. Is there honestly nothing cheaper than an HD Fury device that we would recommend? Rob, there got to be something.
So, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, it's why I reluctantly said last week, I end up always coming back to the HD Fury devices because
it'll do it.
They work, they're solid, and they cost what they cost. But yeah, we haven't run into the same complaints and issues. You're not alone. You're not the first one where this very same thing has happened. So I will say, Sewell, one of my other favorite brands, they have their split deck, which is one HDMI input, two HDMI outputs, and it will send two different signals from the same signal source to two different displays. It's basically just a downscaler. One display is 4K, another display is 1080p, but they can both be 4K with slightly different EDIDs. It'll do that. It'll do that for just $55, but it won't do anything HDMI 2.1, and it won't be able to do like HDR to SDR conversion or anything like that. So it's HDMI 2.0 strictly. It's that Hisense TV these days, if you got a 4K Hisense TV, it's almost certainly capable of HDMI 2.1 type of stuff, and that's probably some of the issue. It's probably why you're getting some of the blanking that's going on even when that's in standby and you're trying to use your projectors. So the HDMI 2.1 solutions that are out there that cost less than the HD Furies and might work are from Monoprice, their Blackbird series. They have an 8K 60/4K 120 HDMI 2.1 model for $130. That's less than half the price of the HD Fury ones.
It's not terrible.
Yeah, not terrible. It doesn't have all the same capabilities, like the EDID management that you do with like little dip switches, rather than like sort of an interface that you can control, like you can on the HD Furies. And the scuttlebutt on those Blackbird HDMI 2.1 devices is you do have, like in your case, you have two 4K devices. So, and one of those is probably HDMI 2.1. So you have to set that to the 8K settings, which particularly if you're connecting a computer, that can have some issues sometimes where the computer always wants to send it 8K and you have to manually manage the resolution. So it kind of depends on what sources you're using. It can be a little bit finicky, which is another reason why the HD Furies are just more configurable. But for $130, that could be the solution. They do list over on Monoprice's website a Blackbird 8K dual function where you can either make it 1 in, 2 out, or 2 in, 1 out. And it's only $70, but it's out of stock and it hasn't been around for a while, and I don't trust that one as much. So
I hate ghost products like that.
Yeah.
So I was looking for a particular blanket, believe it or not. It was just like it's not just electronics. There's always ghost products and the listings stay forever and you can never buy the thing. What is going on there? Anyway.
So $130. We'll have the link for it. The HDMI 2.1 Blackbird solution from Monoprice. It might take some experimenting with the EDID dip switches, but it should work.
I wouldn't mind dip switches in that situation because you're not going to change stuff that often.
That's right.
It wouldn't be so bad. Let us know what happens there. Question from Mario. Mario is an installer. He has already figured out a workaround for the question he's about to ask, but it's supposed to be possible to have everything functioning without the workaround. So he wanted to ask us if we might have any ideas about what's going wrong. In his own setup, he's got a Chromecast with Google TV. He wants to plug that into his Denon X1600H receiver and then output from the Denon to his new 83-inch LG G3 OLED that he recently installed.
Shared some photos of that installation there. Yeah, everything down from the wall at first, but then, in-wall speakers surrounding an 83-inch OLED. Look at that beauty up there. Yeah.
Respect. A quick aside, what are people worried about when it comes to using an LG OLED in a fully sunlit room? They are plenty bright. They don't wash out when you move off axis, and the blackness of the screen remains black even when there's sunlight right on it. They're a great bright room TV. It's just part of what people have been taught to believe, that a OLED is for dark rooms. And that's that.
I mean, I've been saying it, but I guess no. Why believe me? Yeah,
I never forget when we first got that OLED. It was like I felt like car headlights were on me in a darkened room.
Well, it's not just that. It's that when you have bright lighting hitting the screen of an OLED, the black stays black. Like almost every other TV, including quantum dot OLEDs, to some degree, the blackness of the screen, like when it's off or when it's just showing pure black, that turns gray under bright ambient lighting. That happens to all LCD TVs, and it happens to even the quantum dot OLEDs to a lesser degree than most LCD TVs, but more than the LG OLEDs. So I'm like, I love how black just stays completely inky black no matter what the lighting conditions are. And then
that's the beauty of OLED.
It's plenty bright.
Yeah. All right.
Anyway.
But back to his conundrum.
Yes.
He gets random video signal dropouts with the Chromecast plugged into the Denon, as if there's some sort of sync issue happening. If he plugs the Chromecast straight into the TV, it works perfectly. So he knows he can just do that and then rely on eARC to get the audio signal back into his Denon receiver. But he shouldn't have to, right? You're right. You shouldn't have to. And I hate those kind of situations when you shouldn't have to do the thing.
He does too. It's driving him nuts. He's like, what's going wrong?
It's driving me nuts just hearing about it. He has definitely tried both the standard and enhanced settings for the HDMI input on his Denon, and that wasn't the fix. So what else could it be? None of his other sources have this problem, and the Chromecast isn't sending any higher bandwidth video signal than those, so what gives? Oh, God, man, I feel for you. This is the kind of thing that would just would drive me insane. I don't know what the answer is right away.
Well, I mean, you know
works
what Tom would say.
Works in the TV, but not through the receiver. Yeah, I would say stick it in the TV, use it with eARC, and just deal. That's what I do. But
you know what Tom would say, and I'm going to say it too. Do you have HDMI CEC on in any way, shape, or form?
CEC is the devil. That's true. It's the devil.
Because I mean, like, I'm trying to. Yeah, there was that standard versus enhanced setting.
But I forget what. I think on my receiver, you have to have that on if you want eARC or something like that. There was something.
Yeah. CEC has to be activated. So in the Denon and Marantz's, you can have the audio return channel or the enhanced audio return channel active without the HDMI control part of CEC turned on. It's very nice. They let you separate those two things.
See.
But the TV must have LG's whatever stupid name they use for, they call their Simp Link. Is that what LG calls HDMI
remember.
CEC? But you do have to have that turned on if you're going to use the eARC connection. That does have to be active. So I mean, I would certainly turn HDMI CEC off in every device, right? The TV, the AV receiver, the Chromecast, and all the other sources too, because if HDMI CEC is on in a single device, somehow that seems to worm its way through the entire signal chain of everything.
What a terrible standard they came up with. It's almost as bad as Bluetooth itself.
Because this does seem like the sort of thing where you got a cable box maybe, and that's plugged into one of the other HDMI outputs, and then when one thing goes into standby in the background, it causes a little video blip, right? We get that all the time. Right? We get that all the time where I've switched to a different source device, but I'm not using it anymore, but in the background it puts itself to sleep, and when that happens, you get the little video blip. That's a pretty common thing that happens, and that's due to HDMI CEC. So that's my guess as to what's going, because there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be able to plug a Chromecast with Google TV into a Denon receiver, plug the Denon receiver into the TV, and have that function perfectly fine. There's absolutely no reason why that shouldn't work.
Should work.
Let's see.
I like the CEC, the HDMI CEC idea, though. Yeah.
Yeah, because forgot
about that.
Okay. Other thing it could be, I'm not even familiar enough with the Chromecast with Google TV's output settings, but if there's the option to set its chroma subsampling to either 420 or something else, 422 or 444, because certainly like Apple TV 4K has that option, right? NVIDIA Shield has that option. You can set it to 420 or something else. It's either 422 or 444 as the other options. Set it to 420. There is nothing coming in through that Chromecast other than games, I suppose. I don't know if you're playing any games on your Chromecast with Google TV, but any video streaming, the signal coming in is 420. There's no reason to change that in the Chromecast itself. And sometimes the chroma subsampling changing leads to dropouts. It did in Tom's case, right? Tom was having problems. He got his brand new Apple TV 4K, plugged that into his Denon receiver, plugged that into the Denon into his LG OLED, and he was having problems until we set that Apple TV 4K to 420 instead of 422. So those would be the two things to check, CEC and the chroma subsampling.
So, Rob, we have a very long question coming up next.
Okay.
And it is the last question.
It is the last question.
I'm going to do my best to hang in here and let's finish this.
That'll be all the questions for this week. It'll be about 2 hours, I think.
I think it will come out to the typical 2 hours. I know that, we don't want to disappoint the 2 hour club.
That's right.
We'll come right at it, either a little under, a little over, but we'll call it a 2 hour show. So we've got an involved question here from Sasi. I hope I am saying that right. I
think so. Yeah.
Sasi?
He's never complained.
Okay. What is the major benefit of Beryllium tweeters anyway? He's often come across descriptions of them being quicker. Does that just mean faster transient response? Are they as fast as ribbon tweeters? Would you like to answer that yet, or should we continue on with some more?
Let's do the whole thing and we'll do it all. Yeah.
Do the whole section here. He's actually spoken to a couple of mid-sized speaker company designers, and they've told him how there is basically just one supplier that you can work with if you want to design your own custom Beryllium drivers. And it is very expensive and time-consuming to do so. Huge speaker companies like Harman, Focal, and Paradigm can make a go of it at scale, and there are some off-the-shelf driver options available, but no one wants to work with you if you want to manufacture a smaller run of a custom part. So is the Beryllium juice really worth the squeeze? I like how that's put. I don't like when I hear about different materials for different drivers, yes, the goal is ultimately stiff and ultimately light and perfect, creation of the waveform in the air around it.
Yeah, a mathematical point, ideally.
Yeah, a perfect mathematical point, perfect plane that you can move perfectly. Yeah. And I don't know, does Beryllium make that easier or more accurate than any other material?
So physically, as a metal, it is lighter than titanium. It is stiffer than aluminum, but it also has better self-damping than something like titanium or even magnesium. So we're seeing these like aluminum magnesium composite drivers to get you the lightweight but better damping. You certainly see titanium tweeters to get that lightweight and stiffness, but Beryllium just strikes this wonderful balance of having very, very, very lightweight, but good structural stiffness while still having good internal damping. It's a very difficult thing to come across. So that's why it makes for an excellent tweeter material. It's very difficult to work with. It is toxic. You can't touch it with your skin because it will...
really? So as the consumer, I can't touch it.
You really should not. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I did not know that.
It is a toxic substance. It can get absorbed through your skin. Typically, the way they're working with it is like sort of a vapor deposition type of manufacturing process. Has to all be done in a clean room because if you inhale any of that, you could die. It can make you very,
I don't think I want that. That doesn't sound like a thing I want.
That's during the manufacturing process, not once it's actually a finished product. So like that's why there's the cost there, right? That's why nobody's going to do a small manufacturing run for a custom part. It's just way too much cost. So yeah, that's all tough. Is the idea of it being quicker? Yeah, I assume it's all that stuff. Very lightweight, good structural stiffness, but good internal damping. That does mean better transient response. That's what we're talking about. You send a very instantaneous impulse signal through it. How long does it take to respond to that signal? How quickly does it stop when the signal says stop? And it does that faster than a titanium tweeter, than an aluminum tweeter, than an aluminum magnesium tweeter. Any of those, it does it faster. It has those structural and physical characteristics to it. But is it as transient fast as a ribbon tweeter? No, it's not. The ribbon tweeters are still ever so slightly faster. So as far as a metal dome tweeter, it's about as fast as it gets. But it's still not as fast as a ribbon tweeter. So, yeah. But what you can get in a ribbon tweeter, you're going to have a longer dimension and a narrower dimension. So you're going to have good dispersion horizontally if you've got the narrow width, but you're going to have poor vertical dispersion if you've got the tall height. Whereas you don't have to have that with a beryllium dome. You can have very even dispersion in a 360-degree, conical area. Right. So you can have that advantage from a beryllium tweeter. So that's why you're seeing beryllium tweeters used in Perlisten. They opted for that. They stick that inside of a waveguide. They can control the directivity exactly the way they want. So there's that advantage to it there. So there's always plus and minuses in terms of that. But yeah, that's what beryllium's all about.
By the way, that reminds me, Rob, at some point in the future, I want to talk on the show about we'll call it my ribbon curiosity.
Sure.
I've just started to begin the process of thinking about speakers. My speakers are 24 years old. And so it's just feels like it's time, and they're not high end.
Yeah.
And
if you're going to buy something, you want to actually notice the difference, right? So
yeah. So like I was texting with Rob, telling him this, and he kind of pointed me immediately toward a couple of things because I'm trying to fit it in a certain.
You got physical limitations. Yeah.
Okay, we'll see. That's an exciting thing to talk about in the near future, I hope. Okay. We've talked about how there is a well-defined industry standard on the video side of things. For high definition, we know the exact color gamut and color points, the exact white point and grayscale, and there's a defined contrast range and gamma curve to follow. Mm-hmm. And for HDR, we have an even more strictly defined industry standard with an EOTF where each signal value means an exact number of nits. Mm-hmm. Go ahead and adjust your own display to taste if you want to, but we can objectively measure and tell exactly how close or far away from the well-defined standard your display is. Yeah. But on the audio side of things, we don't have this sort of well-defined standard for exactly how your speakers should measure in room. Mm-hmm. But Sasi would like to propose that maybe there could be now, and he'd like to know what we think about his logic.
Yeah.
To start, there seems to be pretty good consensus now within the recording industry, if not amongst consumers, that what you want from a speaker is anechoically ruler flat response on axis and wide, even dispersion that won't interfere with applying EQ once room reflections are introduced. That's what Dr. Floyd Toole has been saying for decades. Mm-hmm. And if we look at a lot of the full-size dubbing stages used for mixing and mastering movies, or the smaller mixing and mastering suites for home releases, most of them are using speakers that adhere to that sort of anechoically flat, wide dispersion design, such as JBL M2 mastering monitors or Genelec or Neumann monitors. And thanks to people publishing Klipsch near field scanner measurements of those exact mastering and studio monitors, we can not only confirm their anechoic results, but also use Klipsch's in-room response estimation to see a graph of how those exact speakers will measure in a real room, not an anechoic chamber, albeit with the assumption that this is a real room with even RT60 decay times across the entire audible spectrum. Mm-hmm. So a well-designed and well-treated listening room, in other words.
Yeah.
Those Klipsch in-room estimates show a very linear but tilted response, essentially a 6 or 7 decibel downward slope across the entire audible frequency range from bottom 20 hertz to top 20 kilohertz. This is nowhere near the giant bass boost that some people espouse as being the correct EQ target curve, but it also isn't a perfectly flat line. It's just a linear, gradual, modest rise in output as you go lower and lower in frequency. And while even the best speakers do not perfectly follow that line, they are within plus minus 2 dB of that estimated in-room response. So isn't that it? Isn't that the target curve we should all be aiming for with our room correction systems? Those are the very speakers in the very rooms being used to create what we're listening to and make decisions about final mastering levels. If we are trying to recreate the intent, isn't this the frequency response target. Simple as that. Obviously, just like with video, no one can stop you from tuning to personal preference. Want a big old bass boost or a high frequency roll off? Go right ahead. Switch your TV to vivid mode while you're at it. But as some sort of universal agreed upon starting point, shouldn't this be it? If not, what's he missing? So, my first reaction is, aren't we all shooting for our speakers give us exactly what is on the disc or in the stream or coming across the television antenna, whatever. In other words, we want flat if we can get it.
I mean, I'm not sure that's what everyone wants.
It's not what everyone wants, but that would be the only way to say you got it right objectively. Whereas subjectively, I know I wouldn't fully enjoy perfectly flat. Sure. Like I goosed my subwoofers just a little bit because I just wanted to. It was good, right? But there's got to be, seeing those charts with the little tilt that you showed, where it's coming on down as the frequency goes up. That just strikes me as the wrong thing to shoot for. So I don't understand.
I mean, there are multiple things to come at this, and we have a little surprise. We're gonna see if Joe can join us. Not that we're gonna keep on going, but I guess this is just a little test. Joe, are you able to hear us now without any sort of crazy lag?
Can you hear me now?
No.
Is that any
There's
better
still
or
a
worse?
crazy lag. Lee and I are just wrapping up here, so that was a fun little test. But it's a surprise there. We'll get Joe back next week.
We'll try again tomorrow.
Oh, Joe, man. I did want to virtually meet Joe and talk to Joe. It's very awkward.
Oh, dear. What a mess behind the scenes. But yeah, there are... there's so many things we talk about. I'm going to limit myself because Lee doesn't have all the time in the world to listen to me prattle on and on. But I did want to mention first this sort of, just tilt in the response, right? Not a literally completely flat line where it's the exact same volume from the bottom to the top as an in-room speaker response. This gentle tilt where it's, a 6 or 7 decibel difference from the entire audible frequency range, like not per octave, right? Some people espouse like 6 decibels per octave, no, like this is the entire thing, a 6 or 7 decibel difference across the entire audible frequency range. But this is what what Dirac used to target as their default target curve at the very beginning. It was this very idea of if you took what Floyd Toole, what Harman would describe as close to an ideal speaker as you can get, a tell-it-like-it-is speaker that in an anechoic setting just produces the exact notes at the exact volumes that the signal said to in an anechoic setting, and then also does so with wide, even dispersion. So this isn't acting as put a cone around your mouth and give it that cupped type of sound, wide, even dispersion that it does that. You bring that into a room, you measure the response of that speaker in a room that big caveat here has even decay times across the entire audible frequency range, and this is the sort of response that you get. This is your natural room gain for a room that otherwise has even decay times going across it. So that's what Dirac targeted at the very beginning. They have changed. And you would go, why? Why would Dirac have changed? And there's a couple of reasons why. So the most obvious reason to do this is that if you set this as the target curve for your room correction system, if your speakers are not those types of speakers, anechoically flat, wide, even dispersion.
And they're not. Most of the time.
Many speakers are not, right? Yeah. Many very popular speakers from Klipsch and B&W and stuff like that, where people bought those speakers because they liked the way they sounded in store. But what I'm driving at is here, you're not doing room correction at that point. You're doing speaker altering. Right? If you set a target equalization curve and you're saying, this is the target I want you to hit, but you're not using those anechoically flat, wide dispersion speakers, you are now altering the speaker response. It's not a room correction, it's a speaker correction.
It's like you're just trying to imitate the speakers that are in the other room that Yeah.
Which particularly, like if you're talking about it just has an on-axis frequency non-linearity, but it has wide even dispersion, then you could equalize it to this target curve. You could do that. But if you're talking about a speaker where the dispersion is something other than wide and even, you can't correct that. You can't set a target curve like that. I mean, the equalization system is going to try to do something to the sound of that speaker, but it's going to give you suboptimal results. So one of the and this is where Dr. Floyd Toole's whole approach of, you know what? Don't even try to equalize above the transition frequency of the room. In other words, don't even try to equalize anything other than the bass. Because if you are dealing with any speaker that isn't an anechoically flat, wide, even dispersion speaker, trying to correct that in any way with an equalization system, it's not going to give you the results that you're after. Either you're not going to like the sound because your speaker doesn't sound the way it sounded in the store anymore. You altered its frequency response to something else. Then the whole reason you bought the speaker is because it did have a non-linearity that you liked. So you wouldn't want to do that. Or you're dealing with a speaker that doesn't have the wide even dispersion, and so it doesn't take to equalization of this sort very well at all. So he's like, okay, only try to equalize the bass, and all we're really trying to do is remove the most egregious big old humps and dips so that if you play a sweep, it's like it's smooth. There might be a upward tilt, there might be a roll up or a roll off, but it's like it's smooth. It's not big old humps and dips going on. That's what we're trying to get rid of with an equalization system. And so Dirac has kind of moved more in that direction of taking a before any correction measurement of your speakers, and basically being like, okay, as you move that microphone around, if we're seeing like pretty different response off axis versus on axis, let's just leave that alone. Like we're talking the mid range and treble, right? Let's not try to change the response of the speaker itself, because this apparently is not an anechoically flat, wide, even dispersion speaker that takes well to equalization. This is something else. So let's not even really try. So yeah, other than that, like, it comes back to the sort of Dr. Floyd Toole talked about the circle of confusion, which has a little bit of an unfortunate name because people sometimes interpret that as being like everyone involved is confused about what's going on. That's not
sounds like
meant.
the subtitle of this podcast sometimes.
That was just sort of the name that he gave to what he's talking about. But what he was referring to is, okay, so you get this anechoically flat, wide, even dispersion speaker. You bring that into this nicely treated listening space that has even decay times across all of the frequency response. And you make your recording. You're a mixing and mastering engineer, and you make your recording in that setting. And then you play it back in your car, and it sounds like crap.
Right.
Okay. So
I've been to a couple of recording studios, and in the booth with the mixer and everything, they will have those crazy high-end speakers like we are talking about.
Sure.
But they will also have a second or third pair of speakers.
That's right.
And they will switch back and forth, and they will see if regular people with regular speakers are going to hear what they want them to hear.
Kind of what they're trying to approximate, right? So you play it back through your built-in TV speakers rather than a nice...
if you're doing television.
That's if you're doing television. You play it back through, a sound bar. You play it back through a Bluetooth speaker, whatever it is. And it's like, oh, we run into what mixing and mastering engineers actually care about most, which is what they call translatability. Does my final mix translate to all kinds of different playback scenarios? And the most obviously, you're not going to get full fidelity out of it. That's impossible. But is the most important thing is the singer's voice, is the actor's dialogue, is this sound effect, is this jump scare in the horror movie, like whatever the most critical important thing, does that translate to just about any playback system? So the weird little problem with this logic of being like, we have these anechoically excellent speakers, we bring it into a nicely treated room, I mix and master on that, isn't that what I should target? Most mixing and mastering engineers will end up telling you that the playback that they're expecting for most people to hear is not the same as what they're hearing in their mixing and mastering studio.
Right.
They're anticipating that it will translate to some other sound.
Yeah.
And so
but they want to hear what they need to hear to know that they're doing it right.
That's right.
So I think what you're seeing with these charts, this particular in-room response curve, just happens to be what the popular in-room response sound is for most engineers and mixers.
Well, it's a tool, right? They want a tool that they can trust, so that they don't have to literally go to a dozen different rooms and a dozen different playbacks scenarios. That they can say, I know that if my mix sounds this way in my mastering suite, I have enough experience to know that that's going to translate well to just about any other playback system. I know that in my room, like, I'm just doing this as a hypothetical, right? I'm speaking hypothetical, but like, I as a mixer know that in my room, I have to mix things so that the bass in here sounds louder or quieter than I actually want it to sound when it's played back in the car system or through the TV speakers or whatever it is. But I know my system well enough. I can trust my system. It's consistent enough that I know how it sounds in here is going to translate well elsewhere. And many of them will have, like, they talk about how, in a video mastering suite, you'll have your Sony HX, 3110 mastering monitor.
Yeah, your $50,000 monitor.
Yeah, it was $30,000 for 30 inches, right?
That was about a 32 inch thing.
Yeah. So they have that. That's what they're doing their work on. But then they
want to
also
see
have
one, though. I do want to see one.
They also have the client playback system, which is not a $30,000 30-inch monitor.
Right.
It's, and they're super happy now that we have these 83-inch OLED screens that come really close to that mastering monitor, and that's our client playback system. But they'll also have client playback systems for the audio side of things, which are not their Genelec monitors in their perfectly even RT60 decay time rooms. It's like, kind of open room with some reflective surfaces in it, and there's seats at different locations, and they're using different speakers. Like, very often they'll use B&W speakers. You see a lot of B&W speakers in a lot of client playback systems, or even in a lot of mastering and monitoring rooms that they'll use as their second or even their primary pair that they do their mixing on. So this is why the circle of confusion that Dr. Floyd Toole was talking about is, you end up in this round and round, right? Do I want to do my mixing and mastering on a non-linear system, because that's what I anticipate people are going to listen back to it on? Or do I want to do it on this very trustworthy, very neutral, very dry room with not very much reverb at all? And it's not actually all that enjoyable to listen back to what I created in this mastering room, but then it translates really well to the car and to the living room and to the TV speakers and to the Bluetooth speaker. Like, I can trust what I did in here to sound good just about anywhere.
Yeah.
And then it's
a good mixing studio sound is very in your face. I don't know how to explain it.
I mean, it's very direct sound, very little reflected sound, very like when we were talking, to Trinnov about waveforming, and he's like, yeah, you go to these mastering studios, it's like way under 200 milliseconds decay times across the entire frequency range, super dry, non-reflective rooms, and they sound that way. You play back music in there, and it's like, oh, this singer is in a padded room. It's like, because that's what it is. That's what it sounds like. It's like, it's not actually that enjoyable. I'd rather go to a more reverberant room to listen to this music recording.
For a live performance, yes. It feels more natural.
So that's why you're
feel like you're there with them, whereas you don't. It's a little confusing when you hear a recording in a studio. Yeah. Through the in-studio, near field monitors. It's very right in your face. That's all I can say.
And there actually is a sort of an analogy, an analog to this in the video side of things, which is to actually see exactly what it was like on that, Sony mastering monitor. You have to be in a very, very dim room. And it's like, as soon as you go to a normal living room and maybe the curtains are open, it's like, no, everything that was just above black is not visible anymore. I want to have a gamma curve that goes up more quickly than what I would have in the pitch black room. I want to raise the black level or the just above black level so I can actually see the shadow detail in my living room as opposed to a completely blacked out theater. Like, that's the analog there that says moving away from that strict, this signal level means exactly this many nits. That's only true in the ambient light level is only 5 nits because that's what's in the mastering suite for that video. So we have that same situation in audio. It's like when we're talking creator's intent, the creator wasn't necessarily intending for you to listen in a mastering suite with these well under 200 millisecond decay times, with these very, very linear on-axis speakers, with all of the speakers aimed right at your ears, exactly like the Dolby diagrams looked at. That wasn't the creative intent. That's the tool they used to get to their intent, and their intent was for it to translate very well to a bunch of other systems that don't perform the same as their mastering room. So that is a confusing thing. That is a circle of confusion. What are we aiming for here? And round and round we go. Yeah.
And you can hear the difference over the years based on the kinds of audio systems that people have owned. You go all the way back to the 1950s and you follow music, actually even before then, in the 1910s, right?
Yep.
They knew what you were going to play it back on.
Yeah.
And so they had to go for that. And yeah, you can hear as the technology changes, and I love that sound of when they first started making good fat bass and drums in rock songs, like in the late 60s, because people started getting those big console stereos in their house that had big thumpy mid bass, as it changes, you can hear it. And there's a sound today that's just popular.
It sure is.
It's just fat, muddy bass. It's just big, fat, bulbous, muddy, vibrating bass.
You can thank Beats for a lot of that. You can
everybody
draw a straight line from Beats.
Like a flat frequency response would give some Gen Z a heart attack.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it hurts. Stop.
that is why a lot of my own personal thinking on what I want my target curve to be. If I'm using the Odyssey Editor app, if I'm using Dirac, like what am I actually trying to target with my target curve? It's why my own personal thinking on that has evolved over time. And I mean, look, Dr. Floyd Tools, surprise, surprise, he had it right decades ago. It's like what's more important than anything else is just sort of a smooth looking graph. Like it might have a little tilt to it. It might have a little roll off at one end or roll up at the other, something like that. But it just shouldn't be like really hilly.
Yeah.
Really hilly never is right.
So when I say, flat, I'm talking about, that. It's like, like close enough to flat that it's predictable.
and I always come back to whatever the recording was. If you play a series of chords from low chords to high chords, and you play a series of chords that go along, all of them at the same volume level, all of those chords at the same volume level, it's never made sense to me that in my seat in whatever room I'm in, that should play back where some of those chords sound wildly louder or quieter than the others.
Of course, yeah.
Right? Like the signal said, play this progression of chords at the same volume. It should sound about the same volume when I play that back. That's like I don't really know how that logic could be completely out to lunch.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. It again, I just keep thinking about the difference between different time periods. Like I will jump around on what I'm listening to, especially in the car. And, I'm listening to a song from the 1960s or 70s and it sounds one way. And then I play a song from the 2010s or rap song. And suddenly the windows are rattling.
Yes.
That's because.
But I mean, that's part of, I mean, that's exactly what Sasi was getting at is, if your goal is to be able to evaluate the recordings, then you shouldn't be changing your target curve for every recording you're listening to make it the equivalent of the time that it was expected that you're playing. Like I'm evaluating the recordings against each other. So I need some kind of thing to aim at, So the logic honestly is sound, but it's all the context around it that informs us, the creator's intent was not actually for you to necessarily to hear it in that way with that predicted response that the clip gives you. So yeah,
no, I like the way you put it. That's the mixer, the producer's tool.
That's their tool.
They have
want a
to
tool
have
they
some
can trust.
reference point to create it for you, even if you aren't going to listen to it on exactly those speakers.
Yep.
Makes sense.
So that is it. That's all our questions for this week. We ended up with a 2-hour podcast for this episode anyway. There's going to be like another episode this week when I talk to Joe, assuming we can even get that thing to work. So I guess I shouldn't make that promise. You might be hearing this go, where's the Joe CEDIA podcast? If that's the case, it's because we couldn't get the internet thing working properly.
Oh, man. It's got to happen somehow. Come on, Joe. You can do it.
What a wild thing. But yeah, we'll do our normal thing. Go back up and thank our listeners of the week for this week. I don't know if there were any PayPal donations. Tom will let me know when he's back next week. And we do have 134 patrons over there at patreon.com/AVRant podcast. So big thank you to all of those financial supporters. If you'd like to sign up, that's the place to do it. I want to thank Mario and Joe, who was supposed to be talking to us today, but we'll get to him another time. Hopefully.
By the way, Joe wasn't doing anything wrong.
Oh God, no.
Like
this
was a mystery. Like he was doing it right. We don't know what was.
We know how the internet goes
him.
Sometimes. Yes, that's just what it is. But yes, Mario and Joe, they gave permission for Tom to use their photos on avgadgets.com, so that's very nice. And then we also got notes of gratitude from Stan, Dazz, and Mario for keeping the podcast going through whatever might come our way week after week. So big thank you to that, and a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. If you'd like your question answered on this very podcast, all you have to do is email it to us. The email address is question@avrant.com. So let's see, what are all the things I have to sign off this week? Because there's a whole bunch. This is for AVRant on behalf of Tom Andrew, who's away. Sadly, Joe wasn't here for very much more than a tiny bit at the beginning, and his voice was completely delayed, and everything was very, very strange.
It's kind of fun, though.
On behalf of all of those people, I'm Rob H.
And I'm Lee Overstreet. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.